I chose to do a policy report on kind of the nexus of drug trafficking and terrorism in West Africa, and really kind of tried to concentrate on identifying the different actors who are involved in the various aspects. I stuck mainly to cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines in West Africa. And as far as methamphetamines went, I went mostly in regards to production, and didn't talk quite so much about precursor trafficking. So basically, you guys wanna look through, I guess. So I split the report on the drug trafficking groups into 3 categories. The first categories were the transnational criminal organizations. I just kind of defined that as larger groups who are already established in multiple parts of the world. Of course, the first one was the FARC, who have been one of the top Colombian cocaine traffickers for a while now, and as of right now are kind of the main cocaine traffickers still operating in West Africa. The next group I talked about was the Sinaloa cartel. Their presence in West Africa is not quite established as of right now. There's one case in 2008 where a Venezuelan man who was driving a plane in Guinea-Bissau landed the plane in Guinea-Bissau and had the Guinea-Bissau military show up immediately to protect the plane. However, the plane couldn't take off, and the pilot ended up being arrested, and he was said to have had Sinaloa cartel affiliations, so I don't really know how deep that goes. The other reason why I talk about the Sinaloa cartel is that recently there have been reports that the FARC is selling off parts of its cocaine trafficking enterprise to the Sinaloa cartel because of the peace talks that are going on between the Colombian government and the FARC, kind of in anticipation of demobilization. And with Sinaloa's kind of recent attempts to go beyond the traditional U.S.-Mexico trafficking routes, I think that the Sinaloa cartel could potentially become much more active in West Africa. The last kind of international group that I talk about is the Nigerian diaspora communities. Nigeria is one of the most populous countries in Africa, and for decades now have established communities in South America, in East Asia, and around Europe. And it seems that they have been using these communities to kind of facilitate their trafficking outside of Nigeria, especially within the recent methamphetamine production. It seems that they are using those populations in East Asia to get their meth out there. And so the next group I talk about is the local/regional groups. The Tuareg ethnic population, I guess. Obviously, when I say ethnic population, it's not that they're all involved in the drug trade, but traditionally, caravans that cross the Sahara were run by the Tuareg population. It's a nomadic culture that has kind of spread across most of the Sahara. They say that there's currently 2 million Tuaregs in, I think, like 6 countries, ranging from Morocco and Western Sahara to Libya, all the way down to Mali and Burkina Faso. And because of their caravan routes, in the 90s and the 2000s, they were at first started to bring along illicit goods, such as cigarettes. They're heavily involved in the cigarette trade, and other illicit goods along those lines. And so there's been recent indications that they also started transporting cocaine across the Sahara for groups like AQIM and Lujao, who both have decent-sized Tuareg populations within their organizations. It's also the population in northern Mali that was responsible for the 2012 rebellion, which ended up with the 2013 French intervention. And so, the next, of course, is the Guinea-Bissau military. Guinea-Bissau was the first official narco state, and their military has been heavily involved. The two designated kingpins are the head of the military and then the naval admiral who was recently captured by DEA. And then the next group are the Tanzanian traffickers. In the heroin trade coming in through East Africa, Tanzania is one of the primary destinations for heroin coming out of Pakistan that makes its way through the UAE or Yemen. And there's been plenty of interdictions where Tanzanian traffickers are involved. Usually they're involved with some other population and they just kind of make up a portion of it. But kind of the widespread prevalence of them means that there's kind of like a rising. The UN said that they thought that Tanzanian traffickers were kind of slowly becoming the second largest heroin traffickers in Africa behind the Nigerian groups. And so then the last group is the violent ideological extremist groups, which of course are more commonly known as terrorist groups. The first one is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which was established in 2007 under its current name. There's been indications that Al-Qaeda's kind of main involvement in the drug trade is kind of more as a facilitator and a taxer, as opposed to like being directly involved and just kind of like providing security and those types of things. And most recently they've had two kind of breakaway factions that seem to be a little bit more directly involved in the illicit trade, which is Mujahid, the Movement for Unity and Jihad in West Africa, who have been heavily involved in the fighting in northern Mali, and had taken control of two of the main towns in northern Mali of Gao and Borem, which were kind of known as major cocaine hubs in going through northern Mali. And then the other one, which I'll talk about, is those who signed with Blood Brigade, which is probably the most recent breakaway faction from AQIM, which was founded by Mokhtar Belmokhtar, who was responsible for the 2003 hostage shaking situation at the Ames gas facility. And Mokhtar Belmokhtar has been involved in the cigarette trade since the 90s, since he returned from the Afghanistan war with the Soviet Union. And his kind of area of control within AQIM was the northern Mali, southern Algeria kind of borderline, and that's where they, have been. It's kind of like a key transit area for the cocaine, or for cocaine that's moving into Algeria or Morocco. The next group is Ansar al-Din, which is a northern Mali group. It is a Islamist group who's been fighting the Tuareg rebellion. So there's a big Tuareg population within it, and they they had taken control of Timbuktu prior to French intervention. And so then I went through and looked at some of the U.S. policies that we have in combating cocaine trafficking in West Africa. Everything is done under the umbrella organization of the West African Cooperative Security Initiative, which has 5 pillars, which is building accountable institutions, establish legal and policy frameworks to counter transnational organized crime, strengthen security operations, reinforce justice operations, and to address the socioeconomic causes and consequences of transnational organized crime. Most recently, the DEA has been increasing the amount of vetted units or special investigation units. They had their first one was established in Ghana in 2010, and then as of right now, there are new units being established in Nairobi and Nigeria. And then additional law enforcement training. The U.S. with DOD and DHS have been holding basically workshops to work with local law enforcement, specifically in Liberia and Sierra Leone, to kind of establish a more stable law enforcement presence. And then also the African Maritime Law Enforcement Partnership. Most recently, there was another workshop between U.S. maritime officials and African maritime officials, and the workshop and the entire organization is completely run out of Cape Verde. And so then I also looked at other people's kind of counter-narcotics policy in West Africa. And of course, the first one is the Economic Community of West African States, or commonly known as ECOWAS. In 2008, they established their regional action plan to address drug trafficking in West Africa. It was set to go through 2011, and since then, the UN has basically said that it was a great kind of plan to facilitate international programs in the region, but that in and of itself, they really just doesn't have the capacity to accomplish much. And so, aside from the U.S., the other major operator as far as countering narcotics in the region is, of course, the European Union. The European Union has a program called the Cocaine Route Program, which has 8 main projects that seek to address. It addresses counter narcotics in general, not strictly cocaine, but that's just the name of the program. 5 of which engage West African nations specifically. Most of their programs have been started since 2009, when they kind of turned their focus to West Africa. Most recently, they established a new anti-money laundering program, which was just started in 2013, and it hasn't yet to actually be implemented, thus that I've seen. But it's going to seek to kind of improve financial monitoring in Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and Cape Verde. And the other major recent improvement was the West African Police Information System, which is going to be kind of similar to what the U.S. does in improving law enforcement capabilities, and also will establish a international information sharing system that will be facilitated through Interpol to increase sharing of information between not only the countries in Africa, but also the European countries. And then last, the United Nations, the West African Coast Initiative was also started in 2009. And one of the primary things that this initiative does is establish transnational criminal units in each country, so that, again, also kind of trying to improve law enforcement in most of the regions.